Laudetur Jesus et Maria, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. I welcome you all, dearest friends, to this first episode of a new series of catechesis, which I had promised to my friends since the beginning of September, ever since that well-known live broadcast, which alas made far more of a stir than I had anticipated, in a manner altogether unexpected. In any case, I had promised at that time that I would then begin a series of gatherings simply in order to deepen certain questions, to help us understand the meaning of so many things that we are living through, that I myself have lived through, and continue to live through. As an opening thought to introduce this series of conversations, I had the idea of beginning with a factual portrait of reality, because one of the essential instruments for understanding things well is to try to capture reality as faithfully as possible in an objective manner. For once one undertakes this kind of exercise, everything then becomes, shall we say, simpler, because one adheres to the principle of reality, and one can then begin to ask certain questions about causes. That is, how the reality we inhabit came to be what it is, what we can do about it, if indeed there is anything we can do, and therefore how we ought to conduct ourselves in the face of a reality of this kind. And so, this evening's episode is entitled something along the lines of The Tightrope-Walking Life of a Parish Priest in Today's Parish. It is clear that this too draws from my own lived experience. And I would ask here, should any brother priest or parish priest be listening to these words, to kindly write in the comments or contact me, to send me an email, to tell me whether I am exaggerating, whether he can contradict the things I have said, or something to that effect. Because in truth, the reality we live today, the reality we live in our parishes generally, is the one I shall endeavor to sketch out here, hoping to be neither too lengthy nor, if at all possible, too burdensome. A person who has a vocation to the priesthood will naturally, upon being appointed a pastor, that is, upon entering a parish, be filled with quicksilver energy, with an immense eagerness to act, especially if he has become a priest by true vocation, and so. To become a priest by vocation means to hold the upright intention of acting for the glory of God and the salvation of souls. I believe that all brother priests who have chosen the priesthood precisely out of zeal, out of love, out of vocation, and certainly not because they had nothing else to do, possess this enthusiasm. Long live God. God bless him. It is clear that, as we all know, enthusiasm always ends up colliding with the grayness, with the severity of a reality that is very different from our ideals and from what we had hoped for. Yet the problem is that within the church today there is a reality that is quite out of control and exceedingly difficult to manage. A pastor finds himself having to reckon with it, and at a certain point he must also do a bit of reckoning and draw certain conclusions. So I wanted to offer a presentation that follows, you understand, something like the arc of human life. Human life runs from the cradle of birth to the cradle of death, shall we say. Life in the parish, shall we say, begins with the administration of baptisms, especially for a pastor, and ends more or less with funerals. What does a pastor encounter today when he faces this reality? From baptism all the way through to funerals. I will clearly not be exhaustive, for that would be impossible, yet I will endeavor to offer some examples in this regard. For there are baptisms, I do. First, catechesis for Christian initiation. Second, the sacraments and the communion of growth for children, confessions as well for adults, the situation of parishes, relations with parishioners, pastoral care of the engaged, marriage, pastoral care, shall we say, of adult faithful, and funerals, the funeral rites, and the pastoral care of the sick before the funerals. Plus all the other attendant matters that revolve around parish life. In these parts especially there is the sphere of what are called patronal feasts, though I am not certain I will treat that subject as well, since it is somewhat peripheral and not necessarily universal for various reasons. So then, my friends, this is a situation I myself have lived through firsthand on an equal footing, the sacrament of baptism. Baptisms today are administered to infants generally soon after their birth, though at varying intervals of time thereafter, ranging, when things go well, with only a few presented at 3 or 4 months to 7 or 8 months, a year, the more common age, and sometimes even longer, 2, 3, 4 years, and so forth. Children who are born ever more frequently from situations that are described as irregular, that is, not from religious marriages, from cohabitation, from civil marriages, or from the marriages of persons who have broken up a previous marriage and remarried, and so forth. This, as is well known, does not of course affect the necessity of administering baptism to the child, because, you understand, that poor little one bears no fault whatsoever in any such circumstances. Clearly, a great many matters are bound up with baptism, and so there is the whole pastoral dimension of baptism, the choice of godfather and godmother, any catechesis to be given to the families, and matters of that kind. Now, with baptisms, these problems tend to arise. The First Punic War. You will forgive me a small touch of irony. I am trying to be a little light-hearted because it makes things a bit easier to bear. Concerns the godparents. In some dioceses, certificates of worthiness have actually been abolished because the whole thing had become something of a joke. For while, with regard to the parents, even if there were irregular situations, baptism must still be administered, that is not the case when it comes to the godparents, because the godparent is meant to be a person who stands as a guarantor, so to speak, of the faith of the Church that is transmitted through baptism. And this is where the Punic Wars begin. I will not tell you what I have been through and lived through. As I said, in some dioceses, bishops have gone so far as to abolish certificates of worthiness, which, however, merely shifts the problem. Because it shifts the problem away from the pastor of the parish, where someone comes to you saying, I want a certificate of worthiness to serve as godparent, and you see him perhaps twice a year at best, to the pastor of the parish where the baptism is to be administered, who then finds himself facing the very same problem, especially when there are irregular situations who are publicly in an irregular situation, and therefore are barred from being accepted as godparents. Punic Wars. The very basics are difficult to convey and to communicate. It happened to me 2 or 3 times in all my years as a parish priest that after I had explained to godparent candidates what it means to serve as a godparent, they stood up and said that if this is what it entails, then I will not do it. People for whom I have the greatest esteem, even though evidently they were not, otherwise I would have had as godparents exemplary. Practicing Catholics, let us say. Then there is another problem, the fact, the awareness. This does not, however, prevent the administration of baptism. But it is well known that that child who ought to be raised first and foremost by his parents in the faith almost certainly will not be. Because many children present themselves for catechism in preparation for First Communion who do not even know how to make the sign of the cross. And I am not exaggerating. I repeat, I invite brother priests equally to contradict me. The administration of baptism according to the rite of the Novus Ordo, which is an impoverished rite. I came to know the ancient rite when Benedict XVI clearly, by authorizing the Mass in the old form, also brought this reality back into the light. And I was deeply struck, observing the old rite of baptism, bearing in mind that in the old rite it is not possible, for example, to do the things that now in the new rite are very frequent, such as administering baptisms in conjunction with Mass. Today at Mass everything is done, so then the celebration of baptisms, setting aside the usual universal problem of attire, people presenting themselves in conditions that are at times indecent, including parents and godmothers. Obviously, it is one of those occasions when people are present who never set foot inside a church, especially when these baptisms are celebrated during Mass, chaos, disorder, applause, children hoisted up in the air, things of that sort. And then there is the awareness that for this child, if we carry out the pastoral preparation for those to be baptized and hold 5 preparatory meetings, those meetings are things that serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever, a source of despondency, because either those families go off to another parish where such requirements are not imposed, or they sit through those 5 meetings, which are enough to bring on despondency just to conduct, because you can see that you are speaking of things that matter absolutely nothing to these people. Those who still do this, who still does it at this point, do so simply out of traditions that somehow continue to be dragged along. But many people no longer even have their children baptize their children, knowing that you are then placing them in a situation, because certainly a child in an irregular situation, you must give him baptism, yet the religious upbringing, yes, there is the godfather, there is the godmother. Yes, one hopes that afterward he will attend catechism at the parish, but here another problem opens up. You must understand that over these very matters I have lost parishioners, and there have been outright revolts, for example. I will mention no names. Someone had taken it into his head that he wanted to serve as godfather or godmother, a brother or a sister who is living in irregular union with one person or another. And when you tell him, look, I cannot allow this, that is a problem, he goes to the neighboring parish and they do it for him without any difficulty, after which he goes about the city or the town, depending on where one lives, saying that the pastor refused to baptize his child, defaming you in this way very well, and with a poor pastor always having quite a limited ability to defend himself, because there is also a matter of, even if there are no secrets of the confessional, well, how shall I put it, there is a minimum of privacy, is there not? The date of the baptism. So why is baptism administered at 8 or 10 months? It is because I need time to organize the reception. It is because I have to go to the restaurant. It is because the Godfather cannot come in the catechism of the 10th example. It was written no later than the first 10 days of life. But above all, there is a pastoral problem. What is baptism for? In contemporary theology, the fact that baptism is urgent and necessary in order to remove original sin is not exactly a priority consideration, because now there is the theology of the assembly, of the community, hence baptisms during Mass. Because in a great many dioceses, including my own, for a very great many years baptisms in the hospital have been forbidden. I myself was baptized in the hospital. At a certain point it was forbidden. Why? Because through baptism you enter into membership in the Christian community. So it is an event, and therefore you must experience baptism within your community. This is the mantra today. Very well, so by virtue of this mantra of the community, the fact that you are then baptized at 8 or 10 months is of no consequence. Do you understand? Because these things here do not, it is of no consequence. I have recounted many times that Padre Pio, who was baptized 12 hours after his birth, wept when he recounted that episode very well, and then go and speak to someone who has his child baptized at 1.5 years because the season has to be right, or because the Godfather is away and cannot return any sooner. There is no hope, mind you, except in the rarest of cases. Do you understand? I pause here, because otherwise we shall run out of time and speak of nothing else. The sacraments of Christian initiation. The Catechism of St. Pius X has been cast into oblivion, and above all, catechesis in the form of a true school. No? And why is that? Because the Catholic concept of faith has been replaced for us Catholics. Faith is a form of supernatural knowledge of supernatural truths revealed by God and taught by the Church, which you must make your own, and in accordance with which you must then order and dispose of your life in conformity with them. No. Today the Church is an encounter today. The Church is an experience, so much so that certain episcopal conferences have outright banned the Catechism of St. Pius X, declaring, absolutely not. One must find other formulas, other methods. Now, what is the outcome? What is the fruit of these great wonders? It is that the children come out of catechism class knowing absolutely nothing and having had no great experience of our Lord Jesus Christ. None whatsoever. In every parish there are Punic wars, genuine battles, to get the children from catechism to come to Mass on Sunday. Punic wars to persuade parents that they ought not simply drop their children off at the church door and then come back to collect them systematically at Christmas and Easter. That is, during the periods most important in the year. Yet since catechism is not school, because if you have them learn the catechism by heart, you are preconcilia, you are retrograde. So it is not school. Yet as far as the schedule is concerned, it works exactly like school, because on the 20th of December catechism ends, right? It resumes after Epiphany, and so the discussion is closed. Therefore, Christmas, the 1st of January, Epiphany, gone, with all the Sundays that fall in between, at least 5 deadly missed opportunities. Easter is the same story. Summer is the same story. Some pastors I have known had devised a scheme whereby in summer one was required to, they had a kind of little card with all the Sundays listed. Wherever you went, you had to get it stamped to show you had attended Mass on Sunday. And then if the pastor did not see all the stamps, he would not allow you to receive communion. That is the level we are dealing with here. Very well. At what age, how many years of catechism? Today, all the dioceses have a certain autonomy of action. Some confer confirmation at 18, some at 14, some at 12. Some administer First Communion and confirmation together. Some defer First Communion to age 14 because it must be received together with confirmation. There is a whole array of arrangements on account of which people who change diocese, for example, who find themselves elsewhere, are completely lost, utterly bewildered. Then another bishop comes along and changes everything his predecessor had done, and so things revert, or else they go even further, and so on. But in any case, these another ordinary occurrence, unless a person. I did this at Borgo San Michele, where I took it upon myself to teach the final year of catechism, and over 10 years I managed to keep 50 young people in the parish, because otherwise they simply disappear. That is, they all go to receive the sacrament of confirmation only in order to have lunches, dinners, and gifts, and with the very firm, deliberate intention that once that is done, I will vanish from the scene entirely. A thing of this kind, if you harbor that intention, that confirmation is certainly sacrilegious. At this point there is no doubt whatsoever, and obviously the parents care absolutely nothing about any of this. And so you have set in motion a frightful machinery, catechetical, a mere exercise in deception, in order to organize a journey whose outcome will inevitably be complete disappearance from the parish altogether, save for the rarest of exceptions. With the rarest of exceptions, another problem is the confession of children today. The age of innocence no longer exists, but we poor priests, how are we to know whether these children, receiving communion at 9 years of age, 9.5 years old, are making their first confessions? And how do they prepare them to draw up the framework for an examination of conscience, because there is the danger of violating an innocence granted? And yet today, the age of innocence has all but ceased to exist with the internet, with television, with all these things, and let us not even speak of the absence of any true upbringing, when you have to contend with certain parents who place an iPhone in a child's hands at 9 years old. I mean, what can you possibly do with something like that? Do you understand? One must say, we need to educate the parents, and so we must offer formation courses for parents, but the parents do not come. I did this for years with these very initiatives back when I was at Borgo San Michele, where there were somewhat more people. 10% of the parents would come. Of that 10%, roughly 2% actually took something home with them. Those are the proportions when they came at all. But there are such profound gaps and such deep failures in upbringing that these poor children, there is simply nothing there. There is no chance. One would need to perform a complete reset of families. But to carry out a reset of families is impossible in the circumstances in which we find ourselves right now. And we shall see shortly why that is so. So, this is the situation of catechesis for Christian initiation. And so you find yourself with people who have received catechism instruction for Christian initiation, yet have not the slightest desire to live as Catholics and have no knowledge of the faith. That is to say, I myself have conducted tests, my dear friends, many times in various places as well, with those who were making their confirmation simply, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen, setting aside the fact that many make the sign of the cross with the left hand in their final year of catechism preparation, not knowing how to do it properly, which is precisely what the Satanists do. And if you ask how many of the people standing before you are in a state of grace in their final year of catechism, do these things make any sense? An expenditure of effort of this magnitude for what purpose? What has come of it? What? Shall we speak of the liturgy, the so-called youth masses, the mass as a kind of deaf and dumb spectacle? Someone has asked me to dedicate a separate cycle of catecheses to it, and I am giving it serious thought, because a great many people, my friends, what has been done in these years has been the technique of oblivion. So many years have passed now since before the Second Vatican Council, a very great many. Had it not been for Ratzinger and his motu proprio, many priests like myself who did not even know that it existed, the traditionalist movement, would have continued to remain in a reality of this kind, going mad without knowing that the Catholic Church for centuries had been something altogether different from this. Centuries, a single week. Even now, for my part, a great many things I have never seen. Some of them I am seeing now here and there. I have never seen them in my entire life. The sung Mass, which is extraordinarily beautiful. But the reason is that in order to sing the Mass you must learn it. You must study Gregorian chant. Otherwise you simply cannot do it. And these things were once taught in the seminary, not afterwards. The Mass of today is completely horizontal. As I have already said, it is the only rite in which the priest faces the people. It is constructed as a communal event, horizontal, and within it there is also, here as well, the community. Even theologians who hold the role of the episcopate have put it in writing in black and white that the subject who celebrates, the true celebrating subject of the Mass, is the assembly, and therefore the priest is there, he presides, that is, he guides the worship, but the one who celebrates the Mass is the assembly. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the Catholic Mass. Nothing. The vernacular tongue, it is a rite in which contact with the sacred and with the transcendent is absent. I have always delivered sermon after sermon on attending Mass on Sunday, that it is a mortal sin not to go, and I reaffirm that, yet there are those who say they do not go to Mass because going to Mass conveys nothing to them. And not merely from a negative point of view, even if it conveys nothing to you, you go all the same, but they have no form of contact whatsoever with the Most High. Clapping hands, guitar, strumming, Italian, vernacular tongues, homilies that are at times torrential, interminable, rhetorical. Well, my friends, I do not know what has happened, whether you are still connected. I am at a loss for words. I do not know what to say. I do not wish to play the alarmist, but I am letting you know that we are live again. There were 300 people connected. I was speaking about the liturgy and not a deaf ear among them. There was a blackout throughout the entire neighborhood. That is to say, I had waited to do this live stream for one of a month and more, because even though I have 5G, I did not yet have a stable connection from home. And it troubled me if the connection were to drop. or something of that sort. I cannot begin to tell you the difficulties involved in setting up an internet line that is stable. It is simply incredible, that is to say, a technical problem who have not resolved today, this very day. I was praying so earnestly to Our Lady. They are setting up an alternative solution very quickly. I am going live, a blackout. That is to say, I repeat, I do not wish to play the alarmist. I do not wish to, however, it is a matter of time, because we are finishing this live broadcast, and then I hope from YouTube Studio to be able to, how shall I put it, one ought to be able to do it, one ought to be able to remove all of the time during which there was the interruption. But my dear friends, I truly do not have, I have no words, I do not know what to say. Therefore we have arrived at the Catechism of Christian Initiation, and at the Liturgy of the New Rite. I was saying, and I recall it well, that unfortunately there are some persons who abandon their attendance at Sunday Mass because they no longer find anything there, and even though this is certainly no justification, because the Mass is always the Mass, are we agreed? And so it has been reduced to this state. Yes, but as long as one does not know and does not frequent anything else, and cannot frequent anything else, there are many alternatives. Yet this is a fact that ought to give one pause. Very well, good. Let us turn to another subject, since someone has just reconnected. It is remarkable. That is to say, the subject is the sacrament of confession. Today people do not go to confession. Firstly, almost no one does. Those who do go to confession confess very poorly. It is quite clear that there is no sense of sin. Not even the slightest. Many go to confession, many, or rather few especially, the older faithful out of habit, because they were told that one ought every now and then to go to confession, but it is not uncommon that what takes place is not truly a confession. I am speaking in general terms, that is to say, either they are outpourings of frustration, or they are complaints, or they are requests for counsel or consultations regarding personal difficulties. It is not uncommon for someone to say, well, yes, you must have been distracted during prayer at some point. No, you must have lost your patience a little at some point. No. Or people saying, I have no sin, I have done nothing wrong, I haven't killed anyone, I haven't stolen from anyone. And yet they come to confession. Yes, but you haven't really made your confession. That is to say, it is mortifying, it is humiliating. In former times this was taught, but today it cannot be done. It simply cannot be done. Yet it ought to be done, but it cannot be done. Because if you dare to attempt it, even given the civil laws that exist today, with no one to come to your defense, and being yourself bound by the sacramental seal, it becomes a serious problem. Because in times past, if you went and read the manuals, even those of Saint Alphonsus, the priest would question the penitent. That is to say, he would conduct a thorough examination, seeking to help the penitent directly in making his examination of conscience, if that person was not capable of doing so on his own. But can you imagine doing such a thing today? People take offense, and they can react very, very badly indeed. And as usual, they may go and lodge their firm complaints. But they could do even worse in these times. Do you understand? Because one never knows what battles one may be forced to fight. Now, in the face of this scarcity of confessions, are we agreed? I myself have had quite different experiences. Why? Because preaching, above all online, I have spoken of this many times, the people who listened to the things I said came to an awareness of so many things and undertook a journey of conversion, and a great many of them came to make their confession with me. And I would say to them, you may go anywhere you like. There is no need for you to come to me. No, Father, I want to come to you. I wanted to come to you specifically. And then it also happens that people of formed conscience report that the overwhelming majority of people do not go to confession, or go to confession poorly. And then you find someone who confesses well, who truly wants to make a good confession, who perhaps wishes to make a general confession, and the response is either I haven't the time, or the general confession is handled in a manner in which it simply cannot be handled. This is what the faithful report very well. I am not the one saying this, and set against all of this, there are endless queues to receive Holy Communion. Everyone goes up to receive communion as for how they present themselves in church. Let us not even speak of it nowadays in order to obtain. I know from my own experience what I have been through, that is, simply to have a person come to church at least, I am speaking of summertime, with short sleeves, and at the very least with long trousers, which for a woman would not be appropriate in any case, and for a man a simple pair of trousers would not suffice. Either very well, they do not go, they would not go, they do not go, but one cannot arrive at this point, do you understand? Because in the churches where so many of our confrères serve, where I have been so many times in summer, sleeveless, bare-armed, low-cut, tight-fitting bare midriffs on display. Even during Holy Mass, of course, if a woman comes to you like that for communion, what do you do? Do you send her away? I can tell you that letters have been written to the bishop for precisely this reason more than once, and one does not always encounter a uniform understanding because you have issued a correction. Ah, but you see, you are not very welcoming, you are not very accommodating. Now this person has been put off, this one will not come back, or things of that sort. Almost no one goes to confession, and those who do confess poorly, yet we keep adding extraordinary ministers upon ministers for these matters, these entanglements, these complications. How many times have I read during catechesis sessions? My grandmother used to tell me that in her day, almost no one went to communion, almost no one, that is to say, 90% of the people attended Mass, yet communion was received kneeling at the altar rail. The church was the mistress of extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, lay people, going to touch the body of the Lord, which is now considered a perfectly normal thing. I have never had them in my parish, but I was in a position to be able to do without them. But when I was a parochial vicar, the extraordinary ministers were already there, and I did not find myself at ease with the situation because then I was transferred, and in the parishes where I subsequently served I did not find them there, so I never introduced them. But had I been assigned to a parish where I found them already in place, seeing what they were doing and how they managed things in certain situations, what would I have done? They consider it almost an obligation, indeed a right, that of distributing Holy Communion alongside the priest, a gesture which, as far as I am concerned, enormously undermines the sacredness that is due to the moment of communion, that a layperson should distribute it. Yet today this is not only permitted, but actively encouraged by the Church. There is this drive toward the promotion of the laity, which is, in reality, a clericalization of the laity. And so one ends up making use of all these people because among the faithful in the parishes, a large portion are people who still attend out of tradition, who are completely theologically illiterate, but they are people for whom whatever you say to them, however earnestly you may go and speak to them at length, it goes in one ear and out the other. Then there are these figures, those who are active, the extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, the lector, the choir director. It is that other thing to the right and to the left, and these individuals you find yourself dealing with like petty little leaders. You understand who champion their own rights in the field, they mortify your priest, and you can do absolutely nothing from no point of view whatsoever, because all of these things are permitted now. Not only are they permitted, they are widely spread. I know that in certain dioceses of Italy, other confreres have told me, the rites of investiture of extraordinary ministers, both women and men, with an alb that makes it look like an ordination. Ah, you are. Here I am. You are. That is to say, things that are truly astounding. Now all of this is considered normal. It is standard practice. It is normal very well in parishes where there is a shortage of priests. On Sunday the permanent deacon goes along quite freely. Another problem, the permanent deacon. There is nothing against the permanent diaconate, but the married permanent diaconate is another novelty that has emerged in these times. Deacons have always existed in the church, but no one has known of married deacons as a common presence, except as things were in the very earliest times in the apostolic age itself, who existed, according to St. Paul, as well married bishops. In the beginning, however, when the consciousness of celibacy had not yet fully matured, that era has come to an end. And so they send the permanent deacon to conduct the liturgy of the word with the distribution of Holy Communion, but without the Mass. Obviously, this occurs in cases of emergency, when priests are no longer available either. There is a shortage of vocations. But why is there a shortage of vocations? First, because the priest today no longer knows he is no longer truly a priest. He is not the man of God. He is not the man of the sacred. The priest finds himself no longer knowing who he is, having received a formation that is completely modernist within today's seminaries, entirely so. And all his traditional functions have, every one of them, more or less been assumed by the laity. All of them. The permanent deacon does not celebrate Mass, but he can substitute for the priest, since he can conduct the liturgy of the word without Mass. He can assist at a marriage, he can assist at a funeral without Mass. He can administer baptism. The priest arrives only occasionally. The deacon cannot hear confessions, but he can offer spiritual direction. As for the sacrament of confession, for a priest it has become a source of depression. Because they are managed in this manner, at least in the parishes. If I have simply been unlucky, my brother priest, please write to me. I have had some truly beautiful experiences, but all of them with persons who had made a journey, and many of them, and this is the truth recounted, that they had come to terms with these things because perhaps they had heard the catechesis on the 10 Commandments and had discovered that certain things were sins. They had not known it before. This is common practice. It is the norm very well, and so the priest no longer knows who is who and what he is to do. People want this. That is why priests dress like laymen, because they no longer dress as they once used to dress, as I am dressed. Because I have always been regarded as one of the more traditional sort once upon a time, so there is nothing to be surprised about. You must know that certain people who know me well, and I will add nothing further what you have done, everyone expected it, even among the priests, because you have always been one set apart from the others, because you have always been different. This has been said to me by people close to me who know me well, because I have always sought to live the priesthood as a Catholic priest. I have sought to contain them, all these things, always girl altar servers, for instance. I have never had them yet. It is nearly impossible not to have something of that kind today. Impossible because these things too have been quietly legitimized. I had a very beautiful experience at Borgo San Michele with male altar servers, which also proved to be a great forge of vocations, but today it is impossible because they have legitimized even that. Now we even have instituted lay ministries. For example, a priest once used to live through the minor orders. I myself never witnessed them. I saw for the first time a tonsure. In recent times I had not even known it existed, but in the traditional structures they still remain. A priest becomes a priest and passes through the lectorate and the accolytate, which laymen may also receive. They are lay ministries. The diaconate may also be received by the permanent deacon. So the one thing that remains exclusively his is the order of the priesthood, the very representation of the priest, of the sacred minister, as a man of God, as a man taken from the people and set apart. Kleros in Greek means inheritance. It means one who has been taken and has been placed in an entirely different situation today. There is a fashion of the priest who is one of us, right? The priest who is one of us. The priest is not one of us. He is not like us. The priest is the man of God. The priest is not one of us. The priest is not to be treated as one of us, and he must not allow himself to be treated as one of us. But all these things, it is impossible. Agreed. I remember the oratories. What happened in a parish caused an uproar one day because I say, yes, the oratories are fine. We cannot. You must always descend to the lowest level in the church of today. You cannot understand what the oratory was for. Back when it worked, I run the oratory, and in this way I have the young people here, and then I bring them into the church, I bring them to Mass, and I educate them. It is not as though the oratory had been established simply to let them play and to have them take part in entertainment. That is, that I must set myself to being an activities director for children free of charge, agreed, but now you cannot do it. It is not as though you can say, you come to the oratory, if you come to Mass on Sunday this much, you can obtain nothing more, always on the lower end. So girls wearing Bermuda shorts and short sleeves is not acceptable. Yet that is what one can manage to obtain. Certain things have happened to you, certain situations, wherever I have been in the evening, at certain moments they come at me, or in any case, out and about you let people in. I am not an admirer of the burqa. I say no, not the burqa. But a pastor cannot allow into the parish youth center a young girl who enters without, think of it, her midriff showing through the openings, especially now that oratories are co-ed. So you understand there is always this race to the bottom, and that race to the bottom is not acceptable either. And that race to the bottom is not acceptable either. That race to the bottom is simply not acceptable. The situation is unmanageable and beyond that. So what do many brother priests do in order not to torment themselves? And also in order not to make enemies of all their parishioners, since on top of everything they carry an enormous burden. For if they raise a complaint, the blows come raining down on them also, because you are not welcoming. Because you are this, you are that, they simply give up, some abandon the priesthood altogether. Others press on carrying this sense of frustration, which is entirely understandable. It must be said, yet from which they do not know how to find a way out. The problem is that the church has been completely horizontalized, humanized. There is no longer almost anything sacred. Let us turn to weddings today. The overwhelming majority pastors know this well, of people who approach the sacrament of matrimony, are people who are, at the very least, cohabiting, if not worse, people who arrive at marriage as Holy Mother Church desires, because Holy Mother Church desires even today that you live as two little angels without anyone having laid a hand on you, premarital relations left and right, cohabitation left and right, and then weddings as they are celebrated. What are the bride's gowns like white of little meaning and immodest? So, spaghetti straps necklines that leave half the bosom exposed bare, uncovered backs, sacrileges therefore committed right before your very eyes. I myself once, Here at a wedding I nearly came to blows because I had given every possible instruction beforehand, and what instructions I had not failed to give. They presented themselves in a most indecent manner. I was on the verge of walking out, but if you do, all hell breaks loose. They come after you. I have repented of not having let them come after me, because perhaps it would have been right to let them, but this is so. Then you attend a wedding of this kind. You have certainly witnessed a sacrilege 100%, 100%, 100%. You are witnessing before your very eyes. A sacrilege without question, agreed. Would it not be fitting for Holy Mother Church? Obviously, not on account of a wicked pastor. Because you could not do something of this kind on your own initiative, would it not be fitting that very well you come from a situation of cohabitation, you wish to marry? Blessed be the Lord that you want to regularize your situation. You have made a journey. You have been converted very well, but you must undertake a penitential journey, and this I ask of you. Oh, but in former times, when confession was practiced not as it is today, but penitents were inscribed in the register of penitents, they performed public penance until Easter. These are grave sins. They are therefore you have no children. You have no children who are living in his home for 3 or 4 months beforehand, because you must also make reparation for the scandal you have given, because this is still, even now, a scandal. Not that you come to the wedding as certain people do. I have always prevented it, but I have seen these things done. So then, they already have children, and so they have the children carry the rings, and perhaps the mother has just given birth. A mass and applause naturally after the baptism. And I heard with my own ears someone say, "This is a day of celebration because a family has been born, a new child of God, spoken by the one who was celebrating." I heard it with my own ears. Of course, everything is perfectly normal. It is I who am the wicked one. Yes, I who am scandalized by these things. I am the one who is wicked. I have always been wicked, and I still am. I have become even more wicked, because I am also a great disobedient, a schismatic of the whole affair, one who will likely be excommunicated before long, probably, almost certainly. So for goodness sake, I have now truly become thoroughly wicked. I am by now rather accustomed to it. I always have been. I say, priests, please, write to me publicly or privately, leave your comments. I will tell my collaborators to approve the comments promptly and to say, Don Leonardo is speaking an enormous amount of nonsense. He is making all this up because in parishes things are entirely otherwise. And that would mean that I have simply been unlucky, or that I went looking for it, or that I have been unfortunate. We are still on the subject of marriages. Shall we speak of the adult pastoral ministry? I have poured my blood into catechesis for adults. The biblical exegesis is all up on the internet. Look, the things I have put online, I don't know what people make of them now. For some years now, I have been working on the internet, but in the early years it was nothing more than taking the remaining time to record the things I was doing for real people, for everyone, and posting them online. Biblical study sessions. Adult catechesis in abundance, if you will. Gatherings on the Sunday gospel. Holy hours of adoration. Meetings with parents. I can no longer remember everything else I did. I did some other things as well, but I no longer recall them. Very well, post-confirmation gatherings. And then all the catechetical sessions were worthwhile. But as for results, hardly anyone came because people are simply not interested today. Our parishes are shaped this way. There is the average Catholic who attends Mass on Sunday out of habit, and he tells you, you must not bother me. And I have been told this many times, if you start speaking about sin, about hell, about things of that nature, you ruin my Sunday for me. So be quiet. Who sent you here to wreck my life? And off he goes and changes parishes. Very well. But I have no desire to play the victim on account of this. God forbid. I say, forgive me just a moment, but what am I supposed to speak to you about? Must I speak always and only of migrants, always and only of peace, always and only of solidarity, always and only of a merciful God who forgives us all, always and only of love of neighbor? Is that all I am to do? I refuse to do only that. A priest is not here to serve that purpose alone. Priests have never having done this, they did something else, because this does not save soul. I must save souls from hell. That is what a priest is for, to save souls from hell. Shall we speak of funerals, or rather of the pastoral care of the homebound? I have always gone in person, except this past August and the August of the year before, and personally brought Holy Communion on the first Fridays of the month. I have never sent an extraordinary minister nor a deacon. I have always done it myself, all right? So I know whereof I speak. But even here, for instance, many people do not call the priest, particularly in the villages. It seems as though it were a shame for the priest to come and bring communion to the home. Many people, as one might say, you bring them communion because their children and family members insist, yet you can sense that you are bringing them communion, but it is not as though it matters very much to them. And there is more. You walk on foot with the most blessed sacrament. I carried it in the pyx. I know I have never seen these things myself either, that once upon a time when the priest went about with the most blessed sacrament, there were altar servers with the little bell, with the canopy, with the proper humeral veil. Whereas now you go about with the pyx, and people start talking to you, greeting you. You ought not to return their greetings, but if you so much as venture to respond to a greeting, the parish priest does not say hello. They simply do not grasp that you are holding Jesus Christ in your hands, and that one cannot stop to converse with people at that moment. And I, for my part, would go about, at least in this, wearing the cassock, the surplice, the stole, and carrying the small coffer with the most blessed sacrament in my hands, so that it was visible understood. Nothing. Good morning, Father Lana, and if you dare not reply good morning, there it is. The pastor doesn't greet people, just to say it. People, with rare exceptions even here, have no interest in having communion brought to them. I say this myself. Few, not that I am the one to say it. So much so that the vast great majority of people die without viaticum, without the anointing of the sick. And even the anointing of the sick is another sacrament that has been impoverished, like the Mass in the new form. It is another sacrament that has been impoverished, because compared to the traditional extreme unction, there are no words for it. Just as with baptism and the Mass in the new form, but almost no one receives it. The order of the commendation of souls, even in its reduced form, that too because it has been doled out sparingly, almost no one. People die and you must ring the bell. Funerals for people who, and so the vast great majority, never seen in church Christian life 0 sacraments, before death 0, and then there is the new rite of the new funeral rites, which is truly something. I have always found myself in extreme difficulty. All the prayers practically take it for granted that this soul being saved will go to paradise and will rise on the last day. And even the liturgy itself, not only the homilies that priests deliver, agreed, that no one goes to hell and no one goes to purgatory either, because everyone is in paradise. And there you are celebrating the funeral of someone who, unfortunately, never set foot in a church, never. I cannot say in conscience, I am not in God's place. I wish to hope for the best. And yet I cannot pretend either, do you understand? I do not know what to say during the homily, because everyone expects you to deliver the funeral eulogy, everyone for whoever it may be that has died, and then they want to speak at the end of the funeral. Woe to you if you do not let them speak. And I try to contain even this, in the sense that I would accompany the coffin outside and bring the microphone outside, at least outside, with all those speeches, in short, that are given on such occasions, which cannot be given inside the church. Woe to you if you do not do it, mind you. You are without heart. You are failing in charity. Always the same things. In the new rite it is even provided for. To say nothing of the fact that the deceased are almost all being cremated. Well, perhaps not all, but half of them, yes. We are at 50% as far as my own experience is concerned. And there are even provisions in the new ordo for sequences. The rite with the cremation urn. Thanks be to God that has never happened to me. Something of that kind. But I would have had to celebrate a funeral before a cremation urn. For me, some brother priests have told me they have been obliged to do it, but I could not have managed it. Things would have deteriorated beforehand. So this is something of, how shall I put it, a portrait. It may be an unsparing portrait, but this is what I have lived through. It is clear then that you live within this reality. What can you do within this reality? I endured it for a great many years. You resist, you suffer, you put up with it, and you seek, because within this reality there is evidently a minority of persons who are nonetheless making a journey. A small minority. They are making a journey. But then, take heed. Take heed when you depart. When the pastor changes, one must see whether that journey they have made is not completely wiped out. Someone writes in the comments that they applaud. The ceremonies are all of them like something out of a stadium. But they do it at public ceremonies as well. They do it at official ceremonies with persons far more eminent than a priest. Applause without end, constantly. One does not applaud in church for any reason whatsoever. And mark that one of those who said so publicly, in a homily at Ostia, they found it online, was John the 18th, who said that in church one does not clap, one does not greet anyone, not even the Pope. Certainly John the 18th cannot be accused, quite the contrary, of traditionalism now, can he? For the love of God, really. He himself had said it, because for all that he was not a traditionalist, he was of a certain age. When he ascended the pontifical throne, it was 1958, and so he had been formed in a particular manner. For him, something of that sort was an aberration, as it is, and as it ought to continue to be. But sadly it is so no longer. Such then is the situation. Now the question we shall endeavor to answer in this series of catechesis, if God grants us his help, is a very simple one. How did we arrive at this? What has happened? Yes, it is certain that the world has changed. The world has changed, to be sure. The church sought to offer answers by making certain choices in the hope of winning back souls. But the question is this, for this is what the attempt amounts to. Do you win back someone by trying to become like him? Or do you win back someone by remaining yourself and saying to that person, look, my brother, my sister, I bring you a message different from what you are living. It is a demanding message. It is a message of conversion. You see, many people, and I have already had wide experience of this, might be many people who draw near to what is called the world of tradition. To speak of the world of tradition is something one really ought not even say. One ought not say it. Why does the term tradition appear? It appeared because of modernism, because tradition is nothing other than the attempt to preserve the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith of all times, exactly as it has always been. Agreed? Against the assaults of modernism, which seeks to change, to alter its very structure, and it has succeeded in part in doing so. Agreed, for the new sacraments are there, the new liturgies are there, and they are, at the very least, objectively impoverished. That is, do you understand? They have already imposed certain measures against me. They may take all the measures they wish, but it is objectively the case, agreed, that the sacrament of baptism, the Novus compared to the Vetus, is impoverished. You can name one by one all the things they have cut, removed, or softened. The scholarly studies have been done, all right? Therefore one ought simply to say Catholic. But before long I shall perhaps not even be able to say that I am Catholic after all, because should they take further measures, I do not know. I could not even say that I am Catholic. Perhaps I could not even say that I am a priest. No one can take that from you, but still, do you understand? These are contradictions in terms. Yet there are people who draw near to the world of tradition simply because, why? Because they like the Mass in the Vetus. For heaven's sake, the Mass in the Vetus is, how shall I put it, and it is an experience of heaven, of paradise, truly. Yet you must be careful, because the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church, is not only the Mass. The Mass teaches you how one deals with God, that God is to be treated as God, that God is to be adored, that to God there are offered sacrifices of expiation and of reparation. Now, the Son accomplished this for us, but you must learn to do it yourself. Our life must become a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, as the Lord says through an experience of St. Paul. There are many people who follow tradition, and then when one begins to say, but truly, the faith lived in a traditional manner. If one is young, these are the rules. If one is married, these are the rules. If one is a priest, these are the rules. If one is a religious, these are the rules. In these circumstances, these are the rules. This is permitted and that is not permitted. On Sunday one may do this thing, one may not do that other thing. One must dress in a certain manner. Agreed? It is better if it is possible to provide education differentiated according to sex. That is another matter, that if you go and say it today, they tear their garments and cry out to the heavens. They may tear them as much as they wish, but promiscuous coeducation will never be an objective good. It simply is not. Therefore, so to speak, being Catholic, better to say than being traditional, means embracing a comprehensive path. For this reason I say what is called for here is a resetting of operating systems, a reformatting and a reinstallation of operating systems. When you ask, how is it possible that there should generally be a situation of this kind? What one will attempt to demonstrate is very simple. It has simply failed. This is why one must go to the root of the problem, because the fundamental objective has truly failed. That is, in order to avoid continuing the dying off, the loss of the faithful, one must try to take steps backward in order to draw closer to them. No, it is precisely the opposite. You must try to take steps forward in order to draw them closer to God. You must be even more faithful to the message and lead them to God. This is the great error, which is the error of modernism. The Church must adapt itself to changed historical circumstances. It must re-explain the dogmas, which is not re-explaining them at all, but rather altering them more often than not, and so on and so forth. This will not do. That is to say, solutions that do not go to the root are all of them either convenient arrangements or circumstantial ones, or merely palliative. When you have a tumor, you must not treat the metastases. You must go and operate on the tumor itself. A physician is skilled if he knows how to identify the tumor and does not operate on the metastases. The present situation has metastasized. But if you do not go in and cut, and if you do not have the courage to revisit the fundamental choices that were made, choices that then came to characterize this entire era, one can do nothing other than grow worse. We shall see this in the course of time. The synodality that today is the dominant mantra is nothing other than the latest let us say, the final piece of something that was born with the Second Vatican Council, which is collegiality. Now, I do not know where it will lead us when connected in a cycle of catechesis. I know where I begin, but I do not know where I shall end. I have always worked this way. I have a clear sense naturally of what I will need to do, yet I know well that along the way there will be developments. There are, how shall I put it, the adjustments that our Lord suggests as one proceeds. But this is the crux of the matter, and it is also the reason that moved me to make the choices I have made. That is to say, if you continue to move within a system that does not work beyond the flood of frustrations, which are something one simply bears, it is as though you were pouring water into a bucket full of holes. It is a colossal labor that yields almost nothing because it is impossible, because in any case it is constraining, it is limited. And so let us close. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Laudetur Jesus et Maria.